So, Bryan, can you describe what MasterClass is and what your role at the company is?
Yeah, masterclass.com is an online learning platform. And what we like to do is take the world's greatest minds and impart their knowledge to all of our members. At Masterclass, I'm the director of internal technology, and I kind of oversee all of post-production infrastructure, systems and services, and all of the support functions as well.
What was the situation that led MasterClass to BeBop in the first place?
In about January of 2020, our post-production infrastructure responsibilities were transitioned to the internal technology team that I manage. Prior to that, our post-production infrastructure was managed by a third-party team, kind of in concert with our internal post-production team. But we didn't have anybody that was technically savvy looking over it on a day-to-day basis. Right when that transition happened, we had about 2 to 3 months to get really up to speed with the legacy system that was all on-prem and hardwire connected before the COVID-19 pandemic really hit the stage and forced us to rethink all of those workflows. So right at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to adapt all of our workflows that were previously all on-prem legacy and find a cloud platform for us to edit off of. And this is what started our search down to find the right platform, which eventually became BeBop as we tried out numerous ones. And the thing that we found so far with BeBop is that it could help us in that short term of a very small, or not small, it could help us in the short term of a fully remote workflow, but then also in the long term when we get back into the office for doing a hybrid remote workflow.
So what were the specific challenges that you needed to address?
We had a workflow that really required butts in seats. And when we closed down our office for COVID, it meant that we needed to send in IT team members to ship drives to people's homes, and keep all that data constantly in flight was a huge challenge. Not to mention it was a massive cost burden to purchase all these additional hard drives, additional laptops for people, and send them all home so they could edit in the same facility. But then we also had data inconsistencies because we never knew when a change was happening at home on a local hard drive, whether it would get backed up to the on-prem storage array that was in our SF office. That was like the really biggest challenge that we first came across that we knew we needed to change after the pandemic hit.
What was your evaluation process? You talked about the fact that you looked at a couple different solutions. What were the deciding factors that brought you to BeBop?
So my team is really diligent about making sure we look at all the options available and really run POCs or proof of concepts for everything that is available. So in about April to July of 2020, we did 4 different POCs with cloud editing systems. And some of them were fully cloud systems like BeBop. Some of them were partial cloud systems. And some of them were just plugins that would facilitate and work based off of our current technology stack. After those 4 POCs that we did them cross-functionally with our marketing team and our post-production team, who all have access to this technology. BeBop won that POC hands down. The deciding factors that kind of made us move forward was BeBop enabled us to quickly and efficiently migrate to a full cloud editing workflow with minimal hardware requirements and incorporating all of the tools that our editors were already used to. BeBop really gave us more of an insight into how much editors were actually using their machines and enabled us to securely scope projects without having to ship hard drives all across the country. So BeBop radically changed how we could scale into the cloud and made it almost overnight once we were ready and signing the contracts.
So Bryan, what was the scope of the initial rollout? Number of creatives and desktops and storage, and what was the first project? And give us a sense of how this started.
After the proof of concept, we decided that our first class that we'd fully edit in the cloud was going to be a class that was coming up in our production pipeline, but it was also something that was very analogous to things that we had done in the past. And so something that we had sort of a formula for. We initially rolled it out to a small group of about 5 employees, so a creative producer for over-the-shoulder stuff, 2 editors and 2 AEs. And we started with about 10 terabytes of storage in the cloud, knowing that our raw video files are usually around 8 terabytes per class, per standard class. Mm-hmm. And we kind of decided that it would be Nikki Nakayama teaches modern Japanese cooking. That would be our first class. During that time, we also kept doing the workflows that we did for our legacy system, just in case we needed to fall back on something. But BeBop's efficiencies and stabilities were so spot on that it made editing our first class in the cloud a smashing success. And we never even had to go back and touch any of the legacy systems. We could do it all in BeBop.
You ramped up relatively quickly from that project to where you are now and the future.
Yeah.
So can you describe how and why that happened?
So we ramped up really quickly because we just realized the power of the BeBop platform very early on. I've always been a huge proponent of moving systems into the cloud and not having on-prem legacy stuff sitting around that we need to upkeep and finely tune. If something breaks, just tear it down, build it back up in the cloud, and it should be good to go again. And BeBop is very analogous to that. It was really incredible to see that we could have our editors up and running within hours of them being onboarded. In some cases, we'd onboard them in the morning. They'd go through a quick training on how to get updated and run on their Zero client for BeBop. And then by the end of the day or the next day, they would be starting to run edits. From there, I kind of reached out to contacts at NBC and CBS, and I was just discussing what their future plans for post-production looked like. And needless to say, they all aligned exactly with what we were using BeBop for. So we just decided to jump fully in and start reprioritizing all of our CapEx spend to BeBop and cloud workflows. And at our current time of this filming right now, we're at about 40% of our current classes are being edited on the BeBop platform, and we have a plan to move to 100% cloud within the next year or two. What features did you find or have you found to be the most useful or the most impactful on your workflows? And were there BeBop features that made things possible that in post that weren't possible when you were on-prem? It's a great question. I have a couple of them, so I'll rattle through them. I think the first thing is like permissions and assigning specific volumes or projects to artists. We came from a system that had this ability, but it was never put in place before we took it over. And the company had grown so quickly, it was really hard to change minds that were using it day to day. And BeBop gave us a chance to kind of reset this expectation. And from an IT and security perspective, it was really important to me that all that data only be accessible by the people that need it. We were able to use BeBop to assign specific volumes and chunk things up virtually and just say, hey, this editor needs this access, this one needs this access, this one needs this access. And we were able to get it working on a per individual basis rather than the entire staff. This alone just allowed us to increase our security posture and implement ACLs and approval workflows for when somebody truly needs access to that data. So that was kind of the biggest one. From an IT perspective, I should say. From a staff perspective was the ability to assign multiple workstations. So I'm sure everybody who's done kind of post or rendering or outputs has run into this situation where they are using their machine for a render or an output, and that machine is tied up. They really can't do anything else. With BeBop, we're able to assign multiple virtual workstations to people, and it can drastically increase our productivity and output. So if somebody kicks off a render on one of a very high CPU intensive task, they can just log out of that system, let that render complete, and jump into another work system and start editing another string out, or help a teammate with like project linking or doing something else that they wouldn't have otherwise been possible because those CPU and compute resources would have been taken up on their local machine. So I think assigning multiple workstations was a huge benefit for us. The Rocket Transfer desktop folder, all of our editors love the functionality of their Mac for their day-to-day tasks and jumping into team meetings, going to all hands, doing quick searches for something, and having an easy folder that we can just place on people's desktop and allow them to dump items in made it much easier for them to transition to the cloud because they could know that they could do things in one location and they would just appear in the other. This has been really a versatile way to have them have things instantly available. And we can have BeBop speed up more transfer servers to speed the process up as our employee base expands. So it doesn't feel like we're hitting pinch points or transfer delays because all of that is still extrapolated in the cloud, and we can just scale up or scale back down as needed if we need to save cost.
You talked about how you're at 40% virtual now. Your goal for MasterClass is within about a year or so to be 100%. Can you talk about the impact that BeBop had on the decision to shift to virtual post?
100% BeBop made it possible to shift to virtual post-production. We are still a very small IT staff at MasterClass. I would still consider the company as a startup. We're not as big as other companies, such as like an NBC Universal or a Disney that has engineering resources to build systems like these by themselves. But BeBop was able to step in and be that partner for us to emulate all of those services without having to build out an entire engineering staff for this project. When we came across BeBop, it was kind of like the stars aligned, and we had a great platform that we could connect to our AWS account, quickly get things spun up, and then after a short transition period, just start fully editing classes in the cloud. And that just wouldn't have been possible without BeBop.